watch CNN, I watch Fox, I watch CBS, and in this case, there's a lot of things not being said.
It almost certainly is a recombination event that was laboratory driven.
This is just the essential nature of Chinese communism. Chinese communism is evil.
Every person it harms is directly attributable to the Chinese Communist Party.
I began looking into the origin of the now widely known coronavirus in early February, with its timing amid the Hong Kong protests, the Taiwan elections, and the U.S.-China trade deal. My name is Joshua Phillip. I'm an investigative reporter at the Epoch Times in New York, writing about the Chinese Communist Party's programs of espionage and unconventional warfare for well over a decade. Videos and messages from Chinese citizens leaking through the censorship suggested the situation was much worse than what the regime was reporting. As my research progressed, initial answers turned into more questions. I soon realized there was much more to the story than we were being told. Today, the coronavirus is impacting over 100 countries around the world. Billions of lives are at risk. And from what is said by the Chinese Communist Party, this allegedly started spontaneously in a seafood market in Wuhan, China. Wuhan is the capital of Hubei province, the largest city in central China. Huanan Seafood Market is located in Jianghan district of Wuhan City and is a large, comprehensive market that includes pork and a variety of frozen seafood, flavored spices, as well as some game meats. The first thing that received public attention about the epidemic was an internal notice from the Wuhan Health Commission. There has been a continuous occurrence of pneumonia cases of unknown cause. The notice issued on December 30, 2019, clearly required all medical units to report similar cases of unknown pneumonia. The notice started spreading online, and on December 31, 2019, the Wuhan Health Commission issued a public notice for the first time, saying that some medical institutions found a link between the pneumonia cases and the Huanan seafood market. However, the notice pointed out that there was no evidence of obvious human-to-human transmission and no infection among medical personnel. On January 1, 2020, the Huanan seafood market posted a notice of closure. This was followed by a thorough cleanup of the market, which as an investigative reporter seemed rushed. Guan Yi, a well-known Hong Kong expert, echoed my concern that the move was like destroying a crime scene. Since then, Wuhan officials have repeatedly said that most cases of pneumonia in Wuhan have a history of exposure to the Huanan seafood market. On January 26, the Institute of Virology of China CDC announced that 33 of the 585 environmental samples from the Huanan seafood market were found to contain the novel coronavirus nucleic acid, and the virus was successfully isolated from the positive culture samples, suggesting that the virus originated from wild animals sold at the market. At this point, Huanan seafood market being the source of the epidemic became an official conclusion. A few days later, however, a report from the journal Science published online challenged that story. The report cited a paper in The Lancet, one of the world's top medical journals, and questioned whether Wuhan's novel coronavirus pneumonia could not have originated at the market. The paper titled Clinical Features of Patients Infected with 2019 Novel Coronavirus in Wuhan, China was published in The Lancet on January 24. The first author of the paper is Huang Qiaolin, Deputy Director of Jinyintan Hospital, the first designated hospital for treatment of unknown pneumonia in Wuhan. Why would this come as a challenge to the official narrative?
I think this journal article is very important. It reveals a lot of important information. For example, this paper talks about the first patient onset was actually on December 1st. These patients not related to Huanan seafood market. And also no epidemiological association was found between the first patient and subsequent patient. And then also on this paper, I talk about on December 10th, there were 3 more onset cases, 2 of which were not related to Huanan Seafood Market wholesale. Major discovery is that a total of 41 patients were counted in this paper, and 14 of them proved to be unrelated to the seafood market, accounting for more than 1/3. No one sells bed at the seafood market too, and the official from CDC didn't mention they find any beds in the seafood market too.
Certainly the Lancet paper showing that supposed patient 0 was nowhere near the market. Secondly, that there are no bats in the seafood market or anywhere close. The idea of the spread so fast through a population, just the way it was said through the seafood market, is highly unlikely and improbable.
On January 29th, The Lancet republished an analysis of 99 confirmed cases at Jinyintan Hospital, of which 50 had no history of exposure to the seafood market. According to the New England Journal, of the 425 cases confirmed, 45 cases onset before January 1st had no history of exposure to the seafood market. Notably, the authors of the 2 Lancet papers in the New England Journal of Medicine are doctors and medical experts in mainland China. Daniel Lucy, an epidemiologist at the University of Georgetown, said in response to the Lancet paper that if the data were accurate, the first case would have been infected by the virus already in November 2019, because of the incubation period between infection and symptoms. This would mean that the virus was quietly spreading between people in some parts of Wuhan before the cluster of cases with a history of exposure to Huanan Seafood Market began on December 15. The first expert group from the National Health Commission arrived in Wuhan as early as December 31st, 2019. The expert panel established a set of diagnostic criteria after investigating Jinyintan Hospital of Wuhan that stipulated a history of contact with Huanan Seafood Market, the person having a fever, and displaying the whole genome sequence. All 3 standards have to be met to confirm a case. This standard was used until a second group of experts, including Zhang Nanshan, arrived in Wuhan on January 18th and made a revision. Why did the panel impose a history of seafood market exposure as a criteria of diagnosis, knowing that at least 1/3 of the cases were unrelated to the seafood market?
They clearly know about 14 patients not related to Huanan Seafood Market at all. That clearly means another source of outbreak. I think somehow this could be a malfeasance or somewhat intentionally cover up some important source of infection.
It can go a long way to covering up the actual source by imposing a false place, and you're not looking at the actual victims. Then you're only allowed to find your keys under the light post.
The numbers that we're getting from China about new infections and deaths are highly suspicious. We know that Beijing for 6 weeks in December and January suppressed information of the epidemic. And then when they officially acknowledged it on January 20, they then started a campaign of suppression of information. We know that because the central leading group that was announced on January 26 has a 9-person roster, and it's very heavy with propaganda officials. Indeed, the vice chairman of the group is the Communist Party's propaganda czar. It appears that the party's main goal here is suppression of information, controlling the narrative. That's more important to them than actually ending the epidemic.
I was in China when SARS happened, and we were evacuated, and it was the exact same thing. There was no transparency. They tried as long as they could to cover it up until finally it was just like with the coronavirus, they could no longer cover it up, and then they proceeded to act. I mean, I think from my perception back then, their response to it is exactly the same.